Hi, everybody. I'm going to give you a few minutes to hop on. Oh, we're going to go back to the right slide. Oh, that wasn't it. Everybody loves days where we're having. Did everybody see my kids pop up on my screen? Going to give everyone a few seconds to jump on here. I'm so glad you're with us this month. Happy May. And the line is ticking. There, can we see now? There we go. All right, so we're going to get going. I've got a great presenter here with me today. Welcome to the 2022 Harmony Webinar Series. My name is Christy Weeks, and I'm the Brand and Digital Media Manager for Harmony Foundation. Today, we're happy to have with us Letitia Bader, Dr. Letitia Bader, with Women's Recovery, and she has a fabulous presentation, A Path to Women's Wellness and Recovery. Again, technology, Christy. There we go. For those of us who are just joining, Harmony is a 43-acre campus up in the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Estes Park. We are a residential rehab, and we offer comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. So we believe in long-term recovery, and we have been treating addiction for over 50 years, and we fostered a generation of long-term recovery, and we support our clients and their families for a lifetime. We have staff at all levels who work together to create a community of recovery support. We are a 70-bed residential program. We do have medical detox and an IOP program available, and we are 12-step evidence-based, who is gender responsive. If you want to learn more about us, go ahead and join us on the website, www.harmonyfoundationinc.com, or you can call our admissions staff at 866-686-7867, and they will be happy to answer any of your questions. So a few little housekeeping. For those of you who have been here, you know how this is going to work. We do record all of these webinars, and it will be on our website by end of day Friday under the Harmony EDU tab. We will send your certificate out by email. We do track this with software to know how long you were engaged. I need you to be here for 45 minutes in order to get that CEU. If for some reason you need to jump off before that point and you want a certificate of attendance, I can provide that for you as well. Just go ahead and reach out to me at cweeks@harmonyfoundationinc.com. I can answer your questions about certificates. And if by chance, and it's not in your junk email, because apparently some of my emails head there. Happens to everybody. Please check your junk emails, because sometimes they do end up there and your certificates are sitting there waiting for you to pull them out. But if you don't get it, email me. So today, and I'm going to summarize this because I know she's got a fabulous presentation. Dr. Bader, happy Wednesday. Dr. Bader has worked in the field of mental health and addiction for more than 18 years. She did graduate from the University of North Texas with a PhD in counseling psychology and a specialization in sports psychology, and completed her postdoctoral fellowship in chemical dependency at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. She is a licensed psychologist and licensed addiction counselor. And in addition to that, she is also a certified mental performance consultant who works with elite athletes and their teams. Currently, she is the chief clinical officer at Women's Recovery in Denver, and really focuses on advancing the treatment for women. She maintains a private office practice offering counseling, consultation, educational presentations, and sports psychology services. She has been a previous presenter on this webinar, so we're so grateful that she decided to come back and speak on a completely separate topic than her initial one. So I'm really, really excited that she's here. She does serve on the Speakers Bureau for the National Marijuana Initiative as a cannabis subject matter expert on emerging research, addiction, and treatment. So y'all, please welcome Dr. Letitia Bader, and I'm going to turn it all over to her.
I know that was our joke. We got started because my very first talk for Harmony was women and weed, and welcome to webinars, right? As I thought I was laying down some pretty entertaining jokes and couldn't hear y'all laugh. So use the
I'll
chat.
laugh with you.
I
I'm
know,
laughing with
we're
you,
gonna-
Dr. Bader. I like your jokes.
So I want to get started. I'm a conversational person. I'm going to try to entertain and educate so that you can enjoy your probably 55 minutes, but go ahead and throw it in the chat box already. Is like, tell me the one thing that you want to learn from today. Like, why did you show up? If it was just to get some CEUs, fantastic. You can kind of half tune me out and laugh whenever you want to. But I want to tell you, I know in the introduction, because we got started at Women's Recovery, and you're going to hear that gender responsive, gender specific, right? You're going to hear those catchphrases that are not catchphrases. They're a philosophy. And it's why Harmony shares that same philosophy with us. But we are actually Women's Recovery because we are taking over the world. There is literally a site down the hill in Denver, and then there is a site up the hill in Summit County in Dillon. And I am here for you today to tell you I dislike us being the best kept secret up the mountains as well, because we are one of the only places, especially for our level of care. You heard Harmony, right, doing IOP, but the gender responsive women's only treatment in the mountains. And we're kind of one of the only places for aftercare. She went dark on me a little bit, but I'm going to tell you, see this, the Lexi Wilson is one of a colleague of mine, and we are literally trying to go as far and fast as we can through the mountains to the Western Slope to let people know that we're there. And because we are mountain people as well, we have a history of that, knowing it, is that you can get to our treatment center. We're in person, brick and mortar. And then thanks for technology, we were actually ahead of the curve when it came to telehealth, is that we can bring people in from any side of anywhere that they're tucked in the mountains and figure out how to make this program work for women. And if you don't think that I believe in early recovery, you're going to be sadly mistaken on that one. Like, early intervention is what we preach all the time. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit of the chat. We're going to get started. But if you see my name, right, or Lexi's name, please know that we're the representatives from Women's Recovery, and we are so glad to be of service for this community as well. So down the hill and up the hill, and y'all, if you live in the mountains, sometimes we call it a hill, even though it takes forever to get up and down, but that's where. And look for us to branch out as we go across the months and moons and years, because we need this message for women. So thank y'all. We're going to get started. I am PowerPoint dependent, and everybody at the staff knows that. So I love pictures, and I love letting people know visually and verbally what we're in for. So take a little journey with me, and I can't thank Harmony enough. We've been partners in educating people for a very long time, and they are great at what they do. So there's an old adage, right? Like, here's to strong women. And we literally have bracelets. We just got them for our Christmas. Staff was like, from one badass woman to another, but here's to strong women, right? May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them, and may we treat them. And usually what I love, thank you 75 people that have showed up, because what happens at conferences in this moment, especially, is when we start talking the difference of XY chromosomes and XX chromosomes, is there's usually like a mass exodus. And people are like, oh, it seems too niche, or we don't understand. But thanks for coming to an understanding and education that hopefully by the end of the time is that sometimes you'll learn that substances aren't gender neutral, and that sometimes we do need to treat some specific populations so that we can do it really, really well. And again, I'm going to talk about mixed groups in here, gender specific groups. That's what we are. We are women, and all you have to do is identify as women, very inclusive for people's journey that come through the doors, and understand the curriculum is there, but a wonderful, comfortable, hopefully safe place to hear a message that might be a little bit more specific to us. And you're going to see the challenges as to why. So I am watching kind of why everybody is here, and Christy's going to help, and Lexi's going to help me kind of troll the chat a little bit. And if we get to one of these questions that seems really pertinent, then just jump on. We're having a conversation here. But I love to start with fun facts. So we represent half of the global population. There's a fact on here I love, is that every brain actually started female. So learn a little bit about yourself, no matter what your identified gender or chromosome makeup is. But I want you to see the statistics. And that's why this chat, although in my cannabis chats, I am very heavy statistics and very heavy slides and data because we love our numbers. But until the 90s, and I know for some of my youngsters, right, that come through, as those seem like long, long ago in a land far away, but many of us were getting educated during that time. But there were limited, if none, studies on female participants in treatment. And we have fashion that's older than that right now. But even currently, and that this data is kind of fresh, is only 8% of the research that we have about substance use, about substance treatment, is women specific. So we're a little bit of a gap for that. And I'll give you a little history. I love to go back in time to let you know potentially why we show up the way we show up, and why we probably sometimes have fourth step might include recovery, right? We could hold some resentments for it. But if y'all love truth in advertising, this is one of my favorites. This is literally from a newspaper. So that's actually how we got to treatment before webinars, right? Knowing where our treatment centers were located, as they would post an advertisement in the newspaper and tell us what they could offer. And I love this promise, right? A liquor habit can be cured in 3 days, satisfaction guaranteed, no pain. So drug addiction, right? Ooh, it could be a little tougher, but that was 10 to 14 days. Again, no pain. Positive satisfaction guarantees galore. So even under the most skillful care, right? We started to learn that these were pretty big promises, and that we might then be struggling with a disease that was a little bit resistant to treatment. When women started to answer those advertisements, there actually wasn't a place for them. We didn't have our first asylum for a while. But what a lot of the feedback that we got is that these treatment centers weren't made for us. We didn't need them because we were fragile, but morally superior creatures. So we ourselves probably didn't struggle. But our very first home for women was established, thank you, New York, right next to the New York State inebriate asylum. And again, like some of these words are a little bit hard to say sometimes, kind of for the giggle, but for the historical, right, impact that they have on us as a population, right? Like we sort of got sent away for treatment. There was a lot of stigma that would come for it. These are not really things that you'd want to tell your neighbors where you were headed to for upstate New York, but they were trying to make a place for women to be treated and to really understand what we might need at the time. When our diseases were first conceptualized, many of them really did surround our uterus, anything that has to do with our hormones, anything that has to do with our ability to have children, right? I kind of joke as if it's not one thing, it's your uterus. But that's what was happening, is that we were conceptualizing hysteria, even in early DSM diagnoses, much of it was about hormonal shifts, not about the brain science that we knew. But thanks, right, to physicians trying to really understand it, AA getting started at that time. But our early docs, right, like our early practitioners and physicians started to, in 1870, they said, you know, don't worry, but this chronic alcoholism is much more of a masculine disease. And thank goodness, the freedom from it is one of the compensations, one of the gifts of being born a woman. And one of my last talks that I did, I said, I kind of counted up when I was doing this research, some of the many reasons that it might not be fun to be a woman. But this was one of the concepts, is that because we are a woman, we were immune from this. There's no way we could even bear alcohol, because nice women don't drink to excess. And for many of us, even in my generation, I laugh, is that we sit around and it's like some of us went to treatment in order to just learn how to drink like a lady, and that we could come back to our family and everything and potentially drink in moderation or being controlled. But it really had a lot more to do with our character, and instead of a disease, it had a lot more to do with our behaviors. And you can see us as fallen women. This is still in the 12 and 12, if you want to look. They started to have a little trouble, right? Because when they opened the doors of AA and they opened the doors of the rooms of recovery, is that women came in small amounts, right? But we came and we needed to hear the message as well. But women drunks were much more disruptive, when we said that, like, if you don't know all the traditions of AA, then we can get 13th stepped as well, right? So that's after your 12 steps, or when you're focusing on those, we'll look to the side and get a little bit more interested in somebody else over here, maybe to distract ourselves from our own work. But when we started to have that mixed recovery room, it didn't go so well for the founders. And so they kind of asked us to maybe move out. I know definitely when we talk about the big book, it did hurt my feelings. A woman's story was in the original version. And because she had a recurrence to use due to a relationship from one of the gentlemen in the room, her story got kicked out. And so bringing you back into the present, I just wanted to let you know that we still struggle. We struggle when we are pregnant. We struggle when we're healthy. We struggle when we're young. We struggle when we're old. Even this most recent kind of understanding of cannabis use is that we are like 59% of users are new users for cannabis. They're women. But it doesn't matter. It's an equal opportunity offender, right? It cuts across all cultures. It cuts across all socioeconomic status. It cuts across gender identity, right? Like it doesn't matter. Is we're coming to substance use disorders. We're coming to the disease of addiction in the same rates as men. But we'll talk about our progression is a little bit different for that. So these numbers are kind of just out there, right? Like we get hospitalized, we overdose, we have kind of the same lifetime prevalence uses. You can even see the lifetime use of prescription opiates. If y'all didn't think that the opiate problem was a female problem, we actually consume more of them and stay on them for longer. And those aren't even numbers for benzodiazepines. In one of my earlier talks, a woman asked me for stats on that, and it was astronomical. I actually couldn't find a good statistic, but women led the way. But something as simple as even our biology, right, actually will even change our cravings and our reoccurrence for uses. But I want you to start to see, like, in the 19th century, even the most prevalent opiate users were affluent, educated women. So I want you to start to change your idea of the woman that's walking into treatment. The reasons that we use, though, are different. We usually fight exhaustion. And y'all, I'm going to break it apart just like we do in our program. I know if y'all have been in a recovery meeting, you've probably had a check-in. If you haven't had a check-in, I welcome you. You'll probably have your first one right now. But when we check in on our mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. It's actually a Native American principle to break that open. And so I say something like, we're tired. How are you tired mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally? That is when you'll start to understand the pressures that are being placed on women. And this is from NIH research, even of close to 2020. It's probably the most latest research that we have for specifically women. We cope with pain this way. We self-treat and self-medicate a lot using substances. It is, I think about, we kind of joke about mommy wine culture. Well, I don't joke, but I know it was one of the first things I walked into, like a brick and mortar, like a real Hallmark store. That's how old I am. And I kind of turned to my mom. We were going in there to get a birthday card. And I was like, they're talking about alcohol, like on dish towels. And it was just kind of a knowing glance. And I'm not surprised by it anymore. Unfortunately, I'm not shocked. And we have like dope moms now, and mommy needs her medicine, and moving into that cannabis world about canna parents. It's how we treat health problems. It's how we address our stress levels. And thanks even to nicotine, tobacco, opiates, all kinds of things, cocaine, we often use it for controlling our weight and trying to use it as a health intervention. If you've stepped away, this is one of the slides. It's super wordy. I've broken all the rules to do for PowerPoints, but this is the one I want your attention. If you're visual or listening, we are just as likely to develop a substance use disorder as men. But the direction, the intensity, the progression goes differently. So we'll start with smaller amounts, but we will ramp it up. And I'm going to talk to you about that, the notion that came through for medical terminology about telescoping effect. We are actually more sensitive to the effects of some drugs and more physical effects on our heart and our blood vessels. So I'll translate for the rest of y'all. We literally show up to treatment when we actually get to treatment. Fun fact. We're usually on average 6 years later that we step in the doors for treatment because of all kinds of variables. But when we come sicker. It has a much larger impact on our bodies than it does for men. We are more susceptible, brainwave, all kinds of stuff, right? They're starting to do studies on it, but more susceptible to cravings and the recurrence of use. There is actually a time, we're going to talk menstruation already. That's usually hopefully when I'd get a laugh or a joke, but women are actually more susceptible to recurrence of use the week before their periods. Any of these significant shifts in hormone, any of our biology, right, where neurotransmitters can change, cravings can change, iron deficiencies, right? Even if you were doing nutrition, you would actually eat differently if you were a marathon runner or an athlete during certain parts of your cycle. We are more susceptible during those big shifts in our bodies to go and want these mind mood altering substances, much like sugar. Like we all kind of laugh, right? Like, oh my God, I could still eat this chocolate bunny that's sitting on the counter that my daughter is doing a fantastic job not eating. But I promise you, at certain parts of the month, I want to bite his ears off, right? That's hormones. That's as best that I can say, sometimes to powerless for these changes in body. There is a lot more violence that's associated with our substance use. And then we exacerbate mental health concerns to the nines. So in order to fight the good fight, I take y'all a little bit on a personal historical journey. Y'all heard it. I'm a sports psychologist. So when I was in my postdoc, I started to research. I was like, nobody's really telling women why it's worse. We know it's worse, but we don't know why. So I set about a journey to understand my opponent. And if we don't understand the nature of the illness, especially for women, to me, I think we'll miss some of the nuances. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of an academic journey. This multisyllabic word that we use all the time. This is actually part of our curriculum that I've pulled out for y'all and presenting. So our women get it. I talk as much as I can in elevators and on webinars to let people know that there is a biopsychosocial model of addiction and recovery. And so every one of these factors that we hit and that we talk about, there's a way to get us in, kind of the Jellinek curve, right? And then there's a way to get us out. And that's where our treatment interventions are focused. So if you were drawing circles and triangles, this is how we would do it. We would start a long, long ago in a land far away when we're supposed to put a plug in a jug, right? For addiction. Thank God in the 80s, we became co-occurring specialists. We wised up and started to understand, right, that they started to go together. And I always think about that like a carnival thing. I'll teach a little bit about alcohol right now. Is I didn't quite understand, let's pretend addiction might have been around my world at that time, but somebody that was struggling with depression, why in the world would they take a depressant? That didn't make any sense, right? So why would somebody that's struggling with depression use alcohol? I'm like, that just seems terrible, right? Like if a plant has too much water, you pour more water on it. It's not going to survive or thrive. But alcohol is actually a biphasic drug. So the very first drink, potentially 1.5 to 2 drinks, our brain goes up, it experiences euphoria. And then it goes down, and then the depressant kicks in. And that's my joke when I do groups. I said, that's why they call it happy hour and not happy day, right? Because once that first initial euphoria, and then our prefrontal lobe kicks off and our decision making starts to be pretty terrible, we're going to take this ride for depressant. That's why Lexi and I are like crying in the bathroom right at the end of the night for the party, right? It's because it's opened up a place that needed to not be opened anyway. We got smarter after the 80s, right, and 90s, and we started, thank God for our trauma treatment, our inventors of understanding the body, because all of those things for mental health that we couldn't quite understand, the adverse childhood experiences, all of that started to come in. And now most of the highest level professionals that are working in treatment centers are kind of triple trained, and I call it that way, is that we're usually licensed mental health providers. We have addiction certifications, and most of us have extensive trauma training, and that puts us right in the mode of recovery, right in the middle there. So let's break it down. Y'all know that biopsychosocial. So the big book got it right too, right? Like we did it without fMRI scans. But when we learned about biology, it was an allergy of the body. So like 10 people can drink or use, and 9 of those people can drink or use at ease, and 1 person drinks disease. What's my number? 81 people in here, 8 of y'all go at least, right? And that's why I love those math things that we can go pretty quickly. These are statistics that we share with our women. If you can't remember these, we actually try to kind of bolster them up before we talk about this, is to not shame spiral. Because if we have one parent that struggles with addiction, we're 4 times more likely ourselves. And if we have 2 parents that are struggling with addiction, we're 6 times more likely. And remember, we're going to talk about women take on the patterns of their partners. So we might have partnered up and had a child with somebody that's struggling with addiction as well. Females, millions and millions, 19.5 million females or older they've used illicit drugs in the past year. We have such a difficult trouble in the US with substance abuse. Women, right, we might be second place, but we are a close second place. We are bringing up the tail of it. But here's that telescoping effect. So I'll pull you back again if you've disassociated a little bit. Come back and I'm going to tell you, when we first started this journey, it was a medical concept that kind of came out 70s or 80s. We have like 1 or 2 articles. That's literally the concept of it. Remember, I told you this isn't well researched. And the one article that came out in 2017 said, I'm still going to go with it because anecdotally, science, everything that we know, this telescoping effect does illustrate that women will have the same disease, but at different rates. We will start with lower use, but we will escalate quickly. And a lot of that can be because we can build up tolerance very quickly. We're using it for mood management. I'm also joining in with my partner, right? I laugh sometimes women are just competitive as an athlete myself, right? We had this moment where it's like, if 1's good, 2's better, 3's got to be the answer. But most of it comes from biological concerns, is that our body composition is different. With changes in fat content, volume, and enzymes in our stomach, is that we take the impact of substances harder. And they just showed that in a study for cannabis withdrawal. Like, cannabis withdrawal is twice as hard for women than it is for men. And that is because of a lot of the biological nature of our bodies and how they process it out. Alcohol being a water-soluble drug and cannabis being a fat-soluble drug. I won't describe all the places that we get to store beautiful pockets of fat, right? And thinking about that for breastfeeding and all kinds. But it's why we use that's different too. We're going to use for mood regulation and not as much risk taking. So that means, y'all, we're going to go from morning till night, and it's going to be part of our world. This, if we overlay it, it's why I love Dr. Lofton as our medical director. She does a longer version of this talk, and she overlays the maternal bonding routes, right, in our brain that says, oh, such a cute puppy, 2-leggeds or 4-leggeds, anything that needs nurturing. And it lines up right here, right in the place that we are hijacking our thinking and hijacking our biological understanding to nurture. So that's where psychology comes in next. And so most of us get into treatment, right? We do the biological things first, right? Detox, right? Maybe get some medication assisted therapies on board, and then really start to work on our thought processes. And the big book knew that. It was an obsession of the mind. We have stankin' thinking, right? We know that. And that's why a lot of our top-down approaches are still very effective, as well as our bottom-up approaches, because we do need to understand our thought patterns and how they go, dealing with shame, perfectionism, guilt, y'all, guilt. Any parents out there? I got my AMM right. Like, we're going to change our behaviors if we feel guilty. That's the psychology. It's what we're working on a lot. Biopsychosocial. So social and addiction, it was presented as coping. It is presented as coping. You know, I said that, like, mommy wine culture has towels and cups and t-shirts and can of mom, right? Like, it's how we joke about it. I heard a number. I went to a kindergarten graduation. Y'all don't need to join my live, but just know I went to a kindergarten graduation. As a woman is holding the cocktail with a straw and says to the woman next to her, I'm so glad I took my anxiety medication. Right? I'm like, it was a kindergarten graduation, but apparently, right, so stressful that we needed to change my mood. I kind of wanted to go in and be like, well, you know, the alcohol is kind of knocking the medication off the receptor, but I didn't. I made no intervention whatsoever. But thinking about how it's normed, right? So cultural stress, and this is pre-pandemic, all of the research that you see in front of you that talks about these social norms for addiction and using in women are all pre-pandemic, pre-co-parenting, pre-stressors for that. But I do want to make light or make a note of women do take on the patterns of their partners. That is actually holding up there for the LGBTQ population as well. So just look at who is in their world. It doesn't have to be the heteronormative version of it. It has to be their partner and potentially who is in their household, and ask what they're doing. More often than not, we'll end up doing the same thing. And if y'all don't know that, just take a look to your left. And guess what? Like if your partner eats way too much spaghetti, my guess is eventually you'll eat way too much spaghetti, right? I think about that. We even take on the patterns of our dogs sometimes, right? So just know that who is around us, because we are relational, it changes us. Mental health is the next, y'all. So biological parts of mental health. We see that for suffering. Is always my giggle, is that if you look down all the PPPPs in the mood disorders, that is just because we have a uterus. It's not necessarily even use it. If you use it to make a miracle or not, perinatal, premenstrual dysphoric, premenopausal, and postpartum can all be new and exciting diagnosis for mental health just because of the gift of being female. We exacerbate many of these mental health symptoms, and it's like we're 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I just threw a women's recovery statistic up there. We on average come in with about 3.5 diagnoses. That's a lot to manage. And we don't even go into the medical diagnoses in our intake, because that would probably get us up more to sometimes the double digits. But we know this in the field, is that it comes in pairs with a spare. So thinking about that is that don't just stop at one. If you see that AUD, alcohol use disorder, start to ask, because if you have an alcohol use disorder, my guess is there's another paired drug use as well. Nicotine use, there's a mental health diagnosis, there's potentially a trauma diagnosis, right? And many of us might not meet the criteria for it, but we are on our way for a lot of the symptomology of it. So y'all join. This is the mental health part 2 for social part. Relationships take primary roles, and they elevate themselves to the front of the line of what we need to be doing, taking care of other people and not ourselves. There's a lot of obstacles that come to it. We are likely to ask for help, and we do that despite stigma. It's often, though, sometimes we might not be asking for the right help for the right person. And then when we talk about getting into treatment, there's lots of obstacles to get us into care because we might not have the time. We say that, right? We might not have another parent to co-parent, or we might not have another person to help us bear the domestic load. I always laugh as people are like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, you are a domestic engineer. Please do not make that any smaller than it needs to be. That is a huge responsibility for it, and managing all of that. So let's jump into trauma. And y'all, we know that I love not being the innovator anymore and educating people. We know the freeze, fight, flight response. I'm old enough to know we only had a fight and a flight response actually when I got first trained. So yay for all of the research that's coming out. The Body Holds the Score, right? Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Ruth Lynn. I mean, these are amazing names that know and teach us a lot about trauma and adverse childhood experiences. The history of this study, I hope that you're all doing this. If not, please run across these studies, because what we learned from this is it was by accident that a physician even learned about it and started to survey it. And it was for healthy people. But we know the more adverse childhood experiences that we go through, the more likely that it's going to increase our negative behaviors, our maladaptive behaviors, if you will, and putting us at risk. And I say that, but y'all, this is in 2016, one of my favorite studies that came out, really started to put numbers to the stories. I'm a storyteller, and I love when there's data to back it up. So no ACEs if you're running around, and y'all, there's 10 kind of specific questions. And if something happens before the age of 18, a parental divorce, if one of your parents is incarcerated, one of your parents experiences severe mental health concerns before the age of 18, domestic violence, some of us, right, this feels normal. If you have none of those, 1 in 16 will smoke. This is both genders. This is a whole population. 1 in 69 is an alcoholic. That's a diagnosed alcohol use disorder. Heart disease, IV drug use, like that is like 1 in 480. Like that's a fraction. And then 1 in 96 has attempted suicide. If you let your eyes scan all the way down, if we have 4 or more, and 4 is kind of the break even to say probably severe thing, like that is a lot for the brain and the body and the spirit to handle. 1 in 6 now smokes. 1 in 6 is an alcoholic. 1 in 6 has heart disease. Like this is in one household, right? That you could imagine how affected it is. IV drug use skyrockets, as well as attempted suicides. And this isn't just self-injury, these are attempted suicides. These numbers are huge. And I won't go as far as to have like a sweeping statement. This is the woman that's walking into our office. I know this is the woman that's walking into y'all's office. If we don't understand the history of trauma, we don't understand the biological impacts and the psychological impacts. So this is, if you put that cluster together, long ago, the studies would start to tell us, the Bessel van der Kolks, right? And the people that were studying trauma, is when they were anecdotally understanding how it went together, we got information that unresolved trauma is one of the number 1 reasons that women have a reoccurrence of use. Men rated it in their top 3. They called it stress and other things as well as trauma. But women are to be activated, and say that differently. Watch, so the difference is like anxiety is one thing. I always do this for our women. Like anxiety is like this from morning till night. Activation is flooding. It is a shame and trauma light up the same parts of the brain, and we know that in science. And it is a flooding of the body, taking us offline at the base of our brains. And when we are sober, that is a really difficult sensation to deal with. And that is often why many of us use substances, right? That is if we don't have skills to understand what's happening, if we don't have the knowledge to understand what's happening and the skills to understand and to regulate our bodies, then it's a very overwhelming sensation. But those skills are so simple to learn. Grounding and resourcing, literally they work faster than anything I could give you in the pharmacy. And that's why we talk about mastering them a lot in treatment. So these are some of the considerations. We do have a higher occurrence of co-occurring psychiatric disorders, those anxiety, mood, and eating disorders. And y'all, like, we left a whole gamut of disorders off in mental health, of all of disordered eating, right? Of changes in the body. I think about that, like big, huge, I love you. I love you some men. I love the empathy weight sometimes for pregnancies, right? But there's not usually a point in your life where you like start and within a year could gain up to insert poundage here, right? Like that's not a normal occurrence. And that is a natural progression, right? Maybe if you're an NFL player and you need to make weight for being offensive lineman, right? Like you'd maintain it, but think about that journey, a time where our bodies go, oh, and we're going to pack it on and put the weight on so that we can make a miracle. Okay. And now take it off, and then put it on and take it off. It's a very interesting, even just mental journey to go on, much less biological journey. We do have more medical complications, often untreated, heavily influenced by our community, our partner, our relationships. And that domestic violence is more often than not around sexual assaults. Thinking about, we're about to really hit home, especially for the summer. Sun's out, fun's out. That's what I just said in our staff meeting up at Summit, is sexual behaviors, right? Like sober sex. How do you even do this? Because many of us have used substances to numb out those parts of our bodies and our brains that might have occurred at trauma. There are some barriers, so I just throw them out there so that we can be advocates and for empathy to understand. Our personal barriers to get into treatment are much associated with fear of reprisal from our families, from our jobs, from our communities, right? Like we keep it together. Christy and I laugh and we come from the South, I call it church face, right? Like keep that church face on. If the dysfunctional family rules tell us, don't think, don't feel, don't talk, don't trust, don't grow, like no one's really throwing you a parade on your way to treatment, right? And so for some communities, for some families, fear of not being able to care for children or loss of custody. This one is not on here because it's not evidence-based. I know in our daily world, it's even getting treatment and treatment being held against you in custody battles, right? Being unfit because you are trying to step away and trying to get treatment and asking for help at a really critical, potentially tense time through a divorce maybe, or that battle between partners. Fear of confidentiality and fear of making life changes. Y'all, we like normal because normal is what we know, but it's not necessarily healthy for us. We have barriers in our system. There's lacks of money, a lack of access, lack of linguistic, and I say like language, right? And cultural accessibility of services, limited space, especially in niche programs. We do not, we have space right now. I get to tell people that it's like, we hardly ever go on a wait list. Our clinicians love us for that. But we stay as full as physically possible because we know that is one of those criteria for effective treatment is access to care. And then the absence of childcare, transportation, and employment. And that is why also for our program, we have an IOP. We go in the morning, 9 to 12. You get the 2-leggeds and 4-leggeds, tuck them away, and then you go for care. And then we stay up late. We go from 6 to 9. And a lot of people, I mean, my bedtime changed a lot running groups. And I had, although you're right, you get a little tired, is a lot more gratitude because a woman didn't have to stop her full-time job to make it through traffic. Up in the mountains, we start at 5:30 because y'all's region is a little bit different. But if you got a battle Denver traffic, that's why we start at 6. Up in the mountains, 5:30. Finish your job, clock out, right? Do your thing, get to treatment. Is that you can keep trying life and get well at the same time. And it's an anecdotal rule that I share. If anyone's like, what's the 90 rule? I say like 90% of the time when a man goes to treatment, like a woman stays. And 90% of the time when a woman goes to treatment, a partner leaves. And that's often, I always joke is like possession is 9/10 of the law. And so when you leave that bed, some things happen. And that's a reality that we do deal with in our care. Limited time, it's finite. So that's why we know that specialized treatment is important. It's why trauma integrated people are kind of going around and making gender responsive care. We are actually tasked to by the government. We're actually tasked to in best practices. And so this is one of those parts for clinical, it was held up by SAMHSA. It was like our tips. How are we actually supposed to treat women? If you look at this screen, that is everything we are supposed to be doing for like the gold standard for services for women: medical care, drug monitoring, assessment, trauma-informed, trauma-specific services, all of the crisis intervention, case management. This one gets lost. I'm like circling it in here, right, with my little cursor. But y'all, this is the one that, especially at women's recovery, we are tethered to. This is the action part of recovery. And for women, that is big, saying it and doing it and showing up. So you see that little circle went to a bigger circle. And then clinical support for women, the same is we have to get healthcare. We have to get life skills. We have to get parenting skills on board, right? Because that might have been interrupted by our substance use. So this is the part that I want to share with y'all, and I put it as a gift. Many of you, I would never, ever, ever wish to read all of the policies and procedures that go along with treatment in the great state of anywhere, right? Lex is giving my heads that way. Nobody wants to read these like folders that we have in our office, but I want to bring your attention to something specific to Colorado, and it goes across the nation in many ways. But when we say gender specific treatment, we go, oh, okay, awesome. And they're like, no, here's what I want to tell you is that men and women, if we separated, like a good Catholic dance, right? Men on one side, women on the other, the men's curriculum would be held to the task of educating, and mixed actually goes by those. So if you're in a mixed treatment program, you need to give information about reducing or eliminating substance. You need to give information about individual safety, ways that substance use impacts you and the family and relationships. Everybody's like ticking it off. Absolutely. Who wouldn't? Mental health and medical. I want you to see the extra 4 that women are then required to do. Women's treatment centers are required to do. Child safety issues, although that usually takes, wasn't a joke, I hear my mom, usually takes 2 to tango, right? So, but child safety issues, parenting, trauma, and nutrition. Those are the additional 4 requirements that we are asked to do within our curriculum and our program at all times. I love putting it in a box and sending it over to the men's side and the mixed side. I hope everybody gets this level of care. I think it's one of the gold standards. We actually add 2 other things to it in our program and manage to have the time to do it. No, this is what we need. It's what we deserve. Because we know that like family-based services, and that's one of our modalities. Whenever we get into treatment, especially if we're using IOP, that's where we're at, y'all. Women's recovery. I left a really large inpatient treatment center, actually built even an inpatient treatment program for professionals and athletes. And I was like, this is it. This is how you do it. And started to really understand for women that it wasn't necessarily the best level of care. It wasn't the easiest to get into. But one of the things that we will start to see from top down, from residential treatment all the way to outpatient, is that, and even outpatient therapy, right? And Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, we have to think about this, is family-based interventions are a must. The big book, I laugh, is if y'all haven't looked in your big book in a while, on page 122, it says like years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any person neurotic. The entire family, like to some extent, is ill. If you get to listen to Dr. Michael Barnes or like beautiful people at Harmony, they bring in family like immediately. Y'all, like they're doing the best level of care. The research though, and this is what I love about it, is that SAMHSA even research is that for women, ego development, like who we are, the identity of us getting well and getting better, is actually organized around making and maintaining affiliation, super fancy, right? Like relationships and families, and maybe trying to clean up our own. So there's levels of family-based services, but I'm going to tell you what happens in our care. If you put a group of women together, they make a family. If you put a group of men together, they make a military. So in our treatment center, we have a lot of what is called rapport talk. And the super hilarious is we are like, constructed by a woman, we were envisioned by a woman, we are women providers, and we have women clients. And so the joke is, I'm like, okay, what did she say that she said that she said that she said? What? That's rapport talk. They're making families, they're making dyads and triads, right? And we're figuring out who we are in the understanding of these relationships, who am I understanding potentially as a recovering person in this world. And the difference would be the military, that's report talk, right? That happened, he did this, got it, and all the way down. And this doesn't have to be as heteronormative as you think. I know the literature might have started that way, but it does not. When we think about it more, depending on the LGBTQ population, we are seeing more rapport talk, more matriarchal approaches to it, but we do family. So we have to break it down every now and then, even in our groups. And we do family sculptures in group, but not about your mama, right? About like the group's mama, because the dynamics are happening within there. Who's sharing, who's not, who has power. And that's treatment. I want you to bring your eyes again to this slide, because even in the past year, and this was pre-pandemic, but it's when we could get women in the door for treatment. Remember, on average, about 6 years after men get there, is they were coming to self-help groups. That is why we are we're mutual aid group based, and we say that 12-step based, but like any community where refuge recovery, like free think, women for sobriety, AA, NA, MA, like you pick an A and we want you there, is that understanding of that recovery comes in a community, especially for women, we know is one of the most effective ways for treatment. We can't do it in isolation. We say that like the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's community. And that part when you can see then outpatient next. Outpatient mental health next, doctor's office, inpatient, hospitalization, prisoner jail. We're going to get treatment for many of us by the time that life gets very unmanageable. But if y'all could support this kind of understanding for this white paper that never got written, right, is like IOP level of care, outpatient level of care might be a really wonderful foot in the door for women, because we can hear it, we can participate in it, we have time, we potentially have resources to do it and support. So I will tell you one of the things, if we are in mutual aid groups, is where we got our start, is this was the original title for the big book. And I love me some Dr. Bob and Bill. They both had some trouble, right? Like never had a woman work, will not work on a woman, these sad sacks, these women. So when it got packaged up, just know that sometimes we can change a he to a she and think that it's going to be, it's going to work for us. Thank God for the 5th edition, y'all. It's coming down the pipe if y'all didn't know that, for the big book, that we're going to get some much better language. But there is a lot of 2 cisgender dudes in the 30s like wrote it. Like you got to love it. If you haven't been in the big book in a while, like you got to love some of like King James language. And you can literally feel a lot of the heteronormative parallels. And sometimes it is hard to read as a woman. So we have supplemental, like our Stephanie Covingtons, right? Like anybody that's writing any supplemental information about women, because we have to see ourselves in the recovery community and in the literature. So these differences is that we do progress differently than men. We will report using for a shorter period of time. And that doesn't often, especially when we're doing timelines, I think about that in inpatient, right? Like a man's timeline can be like construction paper, butcher papered out like across a whole room. And he was a physician and kept a company going and 10 years drinking the way that he did. And that might not be the case for a woman who drank for 5 years and it went off the rails. And so that's that validating part that we know, especially for gender responsive treatment, is we talk about like, it doesn't have to go for a long period of time to be a very significant disease, because we will use for shorter periods of time, but man, will it ramp up. Withdrawal is more intense. We respond differently to treatment. I bring this to y'all's attention, just another fun fact. Dr. Laura Martin was the one we went like smoking free in our facility. And she brought us articles that nicotine gum is processed different in women's bodies. We metabolically break down, nicotine gum differently, just a fact, right? So if my male counterpart's like, oh, I'm pretty good, and these 2 little chiclets that I'm doing, and I'm like, oh my God, really? Are you killing me? What? The withdrawal is different. We actually might even respond differently to medication-assisted therapies, and we hold a different fear. But when we do gender-specific treatments, and that's, Harmony already did the nod. If y'all weren't paying attention in the beginning, the best of the best places are doing gender-specific treatment, however it's happening, right? Even if we get pulled away in a different group, if we're not, splitting the treatment center down the middle. But less than half of treatment centers have a specific programming for females. But it works better. And we throw all the modalities at women and we kind of see what works. But we really have to pay attention to their emotional and physical safety. We have to pay attention to the access to care. Women's only therapy environments. It's very helpful if it's made available just for us to talk. Y'all, I've run mixed groups for craving and women's only groups for cravings. And those are very different groups. Right? When we talk about what if really, and nobody's preening or prawning on getting fancied for IOP group, if they come in, does that record, like they come in and we get to it and we talk about some very interesting topics that would make people blush. But those multiple modalities need to happen. We are knowing that when women walk in the door, more often than not, we have a history of adverse childhood experiences, sexual assault, trauma, or both, and are heavily influenced by symptoms of trauma and a trauma response. So you're going to see kind of that marketing go back and forth. One of the phrases, trauma informed, I'm glad we're using it. It has moved out of its meaningfulness for me. And now you'll start to see a lot more of like trauma integrated. This is the model of care that we deliver versus just a philosophy that we know it's on board. So there are standards for care and standards for treatment. Again, we're putting them in place, the Dan Griffins, the Stephanie Covingtons, the Barneses, the Juth, like all trauma-focused research starts to really understand that we have to manage the symptoms that happen and reconnect to myself and my community. American Society of Addiction Medicine also does bio, psycho, social. They might not spell it out that way, but our biological understanding, our psychological understanding of the concerns, and then the social understanding of concerns have actually been part of these theories for a very long time. So just to let you know, like smart people are gathered around saying the right thing. That's where we live. Women's recovery is an IOP level of care, but you can see all of these really helpful interventions. Again, but if you just step into a treatment center, they might not have that gender responsive approach. So thanks, Thomas, right? Even in the 1870s, 1877, for women that get tempted by the sin of Rome, he says, for them, there's no call to home, no sheltering arms, no promise for amends. But I will tell you, although there might not be promises for refuge back then, there are today. And gender-specific, gender-responsive treatments are out there. Seek them out. They are around. Please get a woman in for early intervention. We will drag our feet. We will drag half of the community down with us. I'll use my I statements, right? I know I successfully avoided treatment for at least, on average, 3 years longer than I needed to. And that is like holding on to them for treatment for longer periods of time, potentially at a lower level of care, but understanding the whole person. And this Native American quote that I love is like, when a sleeping woman wakes, mountains move. And so y'all, thank you. Like, just for sitting there long enough. I know I sort of answered some questions, but Christy, like, jump in, tell me your favorites. Oh,
Yes,
y'all, you were great.
what, what?
Great. There's so many great questions.
There are. So going back, Stephanie had a question kind of early on, and she said, as a parent coach, I wonder why men are not required to learn parenting like the women are required.
Look, where's Stephanie? Stephanie, you look at my face?
Solid question. That's what I said. Yeah.
Good question. Again, knowing what I know about the basics of biology, women wouldn't be the only parents. And so it would be epic. But lawmakers are funny. They're funny people.
They are very funny people. Amanda says, have you seen any glaring differences in MAT between men and women?
I don't like glaring, no. Nuance, yes. We actually have sent Dr. Lofton is our addiction psychiatrist, and Michael Workman. They are fantastic at what they do. And every now and then, literally, like, we'll stop and have to say, like, this isn't working the way that we expected. What else is going on? You know, one of our women was going through a cancer treatment. She was in remission, like, just the biological nature of like brain receptors. Fun fact too, is we talk about like alcohol, cannabis, they're dirty drugs. So they sit in the receptor and then they sit in the synapse and they fill it up. And so we think about that as like, even when we're doing a medication assisted therapy, that we know where it's supposed to hit in the receptor and we know what it's supposed to do, is that if we're doing anything else, we can unfortunately throw off that brain chemistry and the neural transmissions with some of the other things that we're doing. You know, CBD for sleep or other thing. That's a whole other talk, y'all. Or even like kombucha. Welcome. I mean, like, we every now and then you just have to be like, y'all, turn it around. Just turn the glass around. I'm so glad that you went to the gym and to yoga and turn it around.
Take a look.
Fermented beverage. Take a look. You wonder why you feel a little weird, right? Or a CBD cigarette. That was one of the stories. She was like, my doctor recommended and I just feel all, and I was like, yep. And I bet that makes other things not work too. So we know that about medication. Medication is not drugs. More often than not, if drugs get in our brain first, or in combination, they're going to take up most of the space for the receptors and the synapses more than our medications do.
Gotcha.
Unless
so Stephanie also has another question for you. She wants to know if you're using brain spotting in your trauma treatment.
I know, love. So welcome to, like, we can only do so much for so little time. We have, and please, this is like, Lexi, meet the community meet Lexi. Yeah. What we do as well is that we're kind of matchmakers, like a Shad Chan is that, like a Jewish matchmaker. So when women come through our program, we do identify a lot of individuals that you're like, yep, should they be great? And so we will start to refer to the community. That's what we actually do in case management, right? We'll get them in for neuropsych testing because they're clean and sober, but things are not clicking anymore, right? Or in all the modalities of care that we give, they would be great at brain spotting. They would be great at neurofeedback. They would be great at insert new treatment here, insert other additional treatment here. And we are always trying to get a team around these women, like Team Bader, right? Because we can only do so much within the time that we do, but we love adding more professionals to their treatment plan. So I'm like, if you're close, send us your details. Or if you can do whatever, send us your details. We are always working on our referral base as well.
Fabulous. Well, I'm going to wrap this up with probably one of the coolest comments I've seen. This has probably been one of the best, if not the best presentations I've experienced. Excellent presenter, clear, informed, humorous, and I was laughing, and works with the audience. So she says, thank you. Thank you for your feedback, everybody. I am so grateful to you, Dr. Bader, for joining us today, and Lexi. And I'm hoping this isn't the last time you're going to present for us, because I know you have so much amazing information. Y'all, thank you for joining us. certificates will go out. Please check your junk emails for those after Friday, because I tend to go there a lot. I'm not sure why. And we also I'll have included in there the link to this presentation, the survey, in case you don't happen to catch it here. We'd really appreciate your feedback on this presentation and what you'd like to see in the future. It will also have Dr. Bader's contact information in case you need to contact her or Denver Women's.
Yes. Y'all,
So,
I can't scroll fast enough. I think there's, sorry, I'm like, private practitioners, say hello, whatever. Please look us up. We are so easy to find, and please stay in touch. We need to hear from y'all as well. Thank you. Thank you.
yes, thank you, everybody. And again, details on next month be coming at you pretty shortly. I hope you have a wonderful week and enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Dr. Bader, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Y'all be safe. Be well.
We'll see you later.